Hello, I'm Dr. John Cruz, and today I'm going to be talking about coping with overwhelm. So this is a repeat of what I started talking about yesterday, but my computer network became overwhelmed. So this hopefully will be the full broadcast today. Again, I'll be talking probably about 20 minutes about coping with overwhelm. If you have questions while I'm talking, you can certainly type them in, and this will be posted on Facebook and it will be hosted later. Sorry. So what is overwhelm? Most of the time we're using the word to describe a variety of different states, but where we're having intense negative emotions and where the emotion is so strong, so powerful that it's not enabling us to think clearly, to use our rational mind, and it's not using us to effectively use our body, so we feel immobilized, overwhelmed, unable to function. And most of those events are actually the first emotion that's triggering them is surprise. Usually that something unexpected comes up, something that we weren't planning for or ready for. But a host of other emotions, again, particularly the negative emotions, are often an important part of the overwhelmed experience. So fear can come up. We can be afraid of not knowing what we're dealing with or what we got ourselves into, or fear of what we're saying or had been saying or doing was completely wrong, or once we're in the immobilized state, overwhelmed state, the fear of being overwhelmed is that it's perpetuating, it's making a bad situation even worse. Anger can come up, so it can feel unfair that someone was putting you on the spot, or a situation called upon you to do something you weren't prepared, ready, or able to do. And also, anger can be directed at yourself. And again, it's often particularly anger that I should have been able to get myself out of this. I shouldn't be overwhelmed right now. I should be able to function in a better way. And then probably the most powerful immobilizing emotions go on with overwhelm are shame and guilt. And I'm blurring them together a little bit, but again, it's getting back to feeling I am wrong or dysfunctional for being in a state of overwhelm, or for showing emotions, or for being this powerfully affected in public. And I think even disgust often comes up in overwhelmed states. And disgust is where we are rejecting ourselves or rejecting something as just unfit, inappropriate, so um, beyond the pale that you're subhuman because of it. So a few things to learn or know about emotions that are helpful in dealing with overwhelm, or understanding so you can get out of it more quickly. Our best understanding is that emotions are an evolutionary tool to respond more quickly, powerfully to the salient, important parts of our environment. So every second, we're bombarded by thousands of pieces of visual information, auditory information, tactile information, the pressure on our body as we're in contact with different objects in our environment. So all of our senses are bringing thousands of pieces of information to us each second. They're not all important. Emotions are a way to cut through and say, wait, that danger over there is really important. Pay attention to it. Or that desirable thing is really. So part of that is that the emotions generally are hardwired. So they are shorter, simpler neuronal systems. They go to subcortical centers. So these are not the complicated thinking cognitive centers of the brain. And because they are short relays, short pathways, they occur faster than conscious thought possibly can occur. So again, when the emotion arises, it arises faster than a conscious thought could have arisen. So from that, I would argue that your initial emotional response is always an appropriate response. Your brain didn't have a choice, so how could it be inappropriate? Now, there's certainly situations where staying in an emotional state may not be helpful or useful for you. But in terms of beating yourself up or feeling shamed or guilty or angry or anything else because of your initial response, I would say get used to accepting Emotions are hardwired in there. They are triggered by things in the environment, and they will happen faster than you can consciously think. So be kinder to yourself in accepting that. So the other thing about emotions is not only are they faster than conscious thought, they're also fairly short. So at a neuronal activation level, an emotion is less than a second. So the neural pathway to complete or connect an emotion is less than a second. If we include the neurochemical flooding and release of other sort of neurochemicals that may have effects longer, there's a Jill Bolt Taylor, who's a Harvard professor who has a TED Talk and other things about emotions, puts it about a 90-second duration for how long our emotions last, or the residual effect of the emotion. Now, when we're in an overwhelmed state, part of it feels that we're locked there forever, and part of it feels like this is going on for hours and hours and hours, or a really long time. And again, an emotion can continue to be re-triggered or reinforced, or you can certainly be angry for hours. You can be scared if someone's pointing a gun at you and they're pointing at you for an hour. You're not just going to be scared for the first 90 seconds. But those are situations where the initial emotion is being re-triggered. And in many of the situations where we're overwhelmed, there's an initial surprise, and then it's more our own emotional response, which is re-triggering ourselves. And the good thing to know about is that if you stop the re-triggering, you can stop the response, and it will dampen out. And again, at the neuronal synaptic level, less than a second, but for the neurochemical myovular adjustment, probably a minute and a half, it will fade considerably. So those are really important concepts to have in hand, because again, part of overwhelm is feeling I'm locked in this, I'm immobilized, I can never get out, it's never going to end. So another aspect I'll mention is that there's a couple conditions, and ADHD is the one I'm going to be focusing on here, is where people are more prone to having events of overwhelm. So why would that be so in ADHD? One of the aspects of ADHD that is commonly neglected or not discussed thoroughly enough is that at least 2/3 of people with ADHD have their under-regulation, dysregulation of their emotions. So emotional regulation is one of the executive functions. As we understand it, ADHD is a collection of executive function deficits. So that means in ADHD, for many, again, this is not absolutely everyone, and particularly some people with purely inattentive ADHD are less likely to have this. But particularly if there's a hyperactive component, that means emotions come up bigger, they come up faster than they do for other people. We know some people are just calm and stoical, and it takes a huge amount to provoke them. Other people have lighter triggers. So that in itself is one reason people with ADHD are more likely to deal with states of being overwhelmed. Another one is that they are more likely to sort of be surprised. They're more likely to blunder into situations either because they're acting impulsively, they said something without thinking about it, they were gesturing without looking whether someone was there when they swung their hand out and slapped them in the face, or stepped on their toe. They make more careless mistakes through inattention. So either because of missing social cues, careless mistakes, inattentiveness, being blindsided, people with ADHD are more likely to fall into these situations. So what can we do about being overwhelmed? So I'm going to talk about a few different sort of tools people have developed or talked about. Some of these are things you need to learn or practice ahead of time, so you're in a state of overwhelm, you are more prepared to deal with them and get out of them. The number one thing is learning more about emotions. Often when you're in a state of overwhelm, it just feels like overwhelm, that's it. I'm immobilized, I can't do anything. So one tool or one approach is going back later, and maybe at the end of the day reviewing. Are there times I was overwhelmed? Can I look back and figure out what was going on, and can I break that down into which actual emotions were going on? Just the fact of naming specific emotions. Oh, This was fear. I was afraid because I thought this was in danger. I was angry because I experienced this aspect of it as unfair. I felt shame or guilt because I felt I had done this wrong thing and should be punished for it. Breaking it down into the separate emotions, learning what the different emotions are triggered by, what they feel like, what they look like, what body sensations they evoke are powerful tools for helping overwhelm feel more understandable and to get out of it more quickly. So another tool is just learning to sit with an emotion. Yes, if you're really scared, fearful, that feels horrible. If you're really furiously angry, that feels horrible. If you're really feeling ashamed, that feels horrible. And part of it, it feels so horrible that that's scary itself, and many people try to flee, escape, get out of the emotions, but learning just to sit with the emotion. And if you do that, you'll see that some of what Dr. Bolt Taylor's 90-second emotional duration exists, that the emotion will be strong and then it will start falling off. And sitting there and being able to sit with that and experience it is really helpful, because then if you can remember that when in your overwhelmed state, that this will not last forever, this too shall pass, that's a powerful way to help it pass faster, because you're not adding back in the feedback loop of fear or anger or shame that's perpetuating being in that state. Another approach or set of tools is learning not just about not just learning to differentiate the different basic emotions, but learning the effects of the emotions on bodies in general, on your bodies in particular. So when we think of emotions, we often just think of sort of an internal emotional feeling state, how you feel, sadness or anger. But intrinsically part of each of these basic emotions, one is their characteristic facial expression. So anger looks different than fear, looks different than disgust, it's different than shame. So not only are there facial expressions that are across cultures specific to each of these basic emotions, but there's certain what we call, and it's unfortunate because it overlaps with the term in neurophysiology, which is action potential, but there is a way your body is primed to act with each emotion. It doesn't force you to act that way, but it strongly encourages it. So for example, anger makes you talk louder and it makes you lean in. And it may create for you tension in certain parts of your body. Shame tends to make you talk more quietly and put your head down and blush if you're susceptible to blushing. So learning the effects of the emotion on your body can help you figure out what you're going on. If you can feel your upper lip flaring, and that may be part of your clue that you're getting angry, or again, certain tension in other parts of your body may be your trigger, it may be your information that you're starting to get fearful. And I'll tie it in with it. There's a set of tools in DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, which teaches people when they're being overwhelmed or just even having a strong, intense emotional state that they want to get out of, working against that action potential or that what your body's encouraged to do. So if you're angry, again, that makes you lean in and talk loud. If you sit down and whisper, that's a pretty effective way of breaking up the anger. With shame, if you learn to talk out loud, sit up straight and say directly, this is what I did and I don't need to be shameful for it, that's a good way for breaking up the shame. So fourth set of tools for dealing with overwhelm is reminding people that despite whatever stress, horrible things going on, resilience is a tool or a collection of tools we have for getting out of it or dealing with it. And that it's something to cultivate. And for resilience is a fuzzy term, but most of us associate some flexibility of thought, some perseverance, and essentially it's getting back on task. And I have a different talk in the series on task versus test. And so often, if we're in a state of overwhelm, it's probably because we made this a test situation. I I had to do this and I failed. Now I'm overwhelmed and can't deal with it. But getting back to, what am I trying to accomplish here? What's the task? How can I carry on separate from this little incident is a way to thinking about that and thinking about what you can do to be flexible, to be persevere is going to help dealing with states of overwhelm. And the last set of tools that's often broadcast for helping dealing with overwhelm is cultivating being able to sit with uncertainty. Humans are not very good at dealing with uncertainty. They're better actually at dealing with specific bad things than with indefinite things. And we've seen this so rampantly throughout the COVID crisis. I mean, so many of the debates, arguments are over different viewpoints on how to deal with that uncertainty. Are you less worried about the risk of dying? Are you more worried about the risk of business closing? Are you humans deal poorly with uncertainty, and becoming aware of that and learning how to sit with that and be with that and know that you may not know right now what the truth is okay. And it's better than glomming onto something that's an untruth and that you fight valiantly for, whether it's true or not. So these are all sort of approaches for dealing or preparing your mind or learning about your body to deal with overwhelm. But what can you actually do in the moment, right, when you're feeling overwhelmed, or what can you do to get out of it? And one of the approaches other people teach or talk is just distracting yourself, pulling yourself out of it. And one of the most common ones is identifying one or two items in your environment. So right now I can see a glass on the counter there, and just saying, that's a glass. I'm going to count to 10. Glass, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I may still be feeling my fear, my overwhelm, my shame, but by the end of the counting, I'm probably at least part of the way out of it. And if I've identified 3 different, the chair over there, and count to 10, the chair, that pulls us into different brain circuitry. It pulls us out of the limbic emotional circuits that are being strongly overactivated, and probably pulls us more into some of the cognitive and salience networks of our brain to get us out of overwhelm. I also would recommend cultivating a phrase or a sentence to sort of announce to the world, you know. And the simplest one is something like, I'm overwhelmed right now. I'll get back to you in a minute or two when I can think about this more clearly. I'll get back to you later. Or if you don't want to acknowledge being overwhelmed, it's, I wasn't quite prepared for this. I'll get back to you later. Or I have so much going on right now, I can't process it all, and I'm not going to blow it off. I'm not going to forget it. I'll come back later. So the other things I remind people is that, again, particularly people with ADHD who know that they are frequently getting into overwhelm or frequent, and maybe, again, fear, anger, shame loops, where it could be more anger outbursts at someone else, where they just get so overwhelmed and screaming and embarrass themselves and are mortified later. So one of the tools you have is actually warning people ahead of time that my emotion, you can acknowledge ADD if you want. You can also say, I know my emotions are volatile, so I know I may be triggered, or things I may get upset more quickly and more powerfully for other people, and just know that when I get through it, I'll get back to you. I'll be okay. And probably at least equally important, but it's even more powerful if you've done the warning people ahead, is what you can do afterwards. And that's always, you can apologize. You can say, I'm sorry I got so angry, or I'm sorry I froze in that situation where you were asking for an answer. Sorry I was immobilized when we were trying to finish up the team meeting. Or people don't have to accept apology. People don't have to, they can do it as they want, but again, many people are willing to give someone the benefit of the doubt, and many people, again, getting back to we don't like uncertainty, people want to know, what the heck was that? What was going on there? Just saying afterwards that may have reflected a tiny part of what I feel, but still like working with you, or still want to work with this company, or still want to continue on this project. Parts of what an apology or an explanation afterwards can be. So I'm not seeing any questions right now. I will, this looks like it's recorded all the way through, so I will be back next Friday at 11, and the topic then will be ADHD and perfectionism. So have a healthy, happy week, and I'll see you later. If any question shows up in the next minute, I'll answer it.